Welcome back to my channel, and as always, thanks to my subscribers. In today's video, I'm going to show you several ways I enhance my buildings to create interest. I add lights to nearly all of my buildings, sometimes interior lights, sometimes exterior lights, and sometimes both. For the Sheridan Hotel, I decided to add coach lights at the front and back doors. I started with a length of 5/32 inch styrene tubing and these finials I had left over from an Oregon Rail Supply signal kit. Small craft beads would make good finials as well. I used these LEDs. They are pre-wired surface mount device LEDs. At 0.6 millimeters wide, they are the smallest LED I have ever found, and they cost about 50 cents each. Be sure to buy the warm white color. Finally, I used a short length of 35 thousandths rod as a lamp bracket. As you can see, the finial shaft is too large to fit inside the tubing, so I used a 5/64 inch drill bit to remount the tubing to a larger diameter. Next, I cut a short length, about 9 scale inches, off of the end of the tubing. I used a piece of wood clamped to my miter box to ensure I cut 3 consistent lengths. Then I used a number 58 drill to drill a hole in the side of the tubing. This is where I will insert the LED. Finally, I used my number 17 blade to slice off most of the finial shaft. I left about 1/2 millimeter. Now it's time for assembly. I used a dab of superglue to cement the finial in position. Then I inserted the LED into the side hole and held it in place with a wooden toothpick, with the LED facing the large hole at the end of the tubing. If necessary, you can add another dab of superglue right on top of the LED. It won't hurt a thing. Once the LED was secure, I tested it to be sure it would light. It would be a shame to install a dead LED. Next, I attached the lamp bracket just above the LED leads. I am using plastic weld cement here. It gives a stronger bond than my usual plastic cement. Once the bracket was solid, I trimmed it to length and painted it black to match the finial. Here is my completed light fixture. I made 3 of these. 2 will be mounted on either side of the main front door, and the 3rd will be mounted at the back door. I mounted the light fixtures by drilling 2 holes in the building face. The upper hole requires a number 62 drill, which will just fit the 35 thousandths styrene rod, and the lower hole requires a number 70 drill, which will allow the 2 LED leads to pass through. With the holes drilled, I fed the LED wire leads through the smaller hole. It might be helpful to solder the 2 leads together temporarily, so you can feed both wires through at once. When the wires have been pulled almost all the way through the wall, insert the lamp bracket into the larger hole and work the fixture until it is a good distance from the wall and oriented properly. Continue to pull the wires into the building to remove slack. When you're satisfied with the position of the light fixture, apply a little glue on the inside of the building where the lamp bracket protrudes through the wall. Once the lights are attached to the building, it's time to wire them up, and the wiring will depend on your direct current source voltage. I have a 12-volt DC power bus, so I need a current limiting resistor. If your DC power is 3 volts or less, you won't need a resistor. I connected my 3 lights in parallel with a 1000 ohm resistor on the negative common lead. I always provide plug connectors for my buildings. This makes it easy to move buildings from one spot to another on my layout. I use these 1.25 millimeter JST connectors. Here I am soldering the 3 positive leads together. Here I am soldering the positive JST lead to the 3 positive leads. And here I am installing the heat shrink tubing to protect the joint. I repeated this with the negative wiring, but I inserted the resistor between the 3 negative LED leads and the negative JST lead. To keep all the connections standard, I attached the male JST connector to the building wiring, and I attached the female connector to my 12-volt DC power bus. Since JST connectors are keyed, it is impossible to get the DC polarity reversed. Once I completed the wiring, I connected the lights to 12-volt DC power. As you can see, the lights came on as expected, and the lamps look even better than I had hoped. It's easy to attach downspouts to your building. I started with these 3D printed scuppers and primed them with Tamiya Fine Spray Primer. After the primer had cured, I painted the insides of the scuppers using raw umber. Then I painted the outside surfaces lightly with an off-white craft paint. I normally use Folk Art Vintage White. When the paint had dried, I brushed on a thin wash of raw umber. This is mostly to help the details show. Last, I lightly brushed on some highlights of raw sienna and burnt sienna to simulate rust. When all the paint had dried, I glued the scuppers to the sides of the building, about 2 brick courses from the top of the parapet. I used Aleene's tacky glue for this. I used 30 thousandths by 40 thousandths strip styrene for the downspouts. That's about 2.5 by 3.5 scale inches. After priming and painting, I wrapped a short piece of masking tape around each downspout. These will mark joints in the downspout pipe. Then I painted rust colors on the bottom side of each piece of tape, and also at the very top of each downspout. When the paint was dry, I removed the masking tape and glued the downspouts to the building sides, taking care to align the top of each downspout to the bottom of the scupper, and keeping the downspout as vertical as possible. Once again, I am using Aleene's tacky glue. When the glue had set, I used my chalk pastels to shade the brick along the downspouts. This darkens the brick very slightly and makes the downspout look as though it has been attached to the wall for some time. I use a very thin, stiff bristle brush, as you can see here. Just scrub the pastel chalk with the brush and apply the powder to the building. It is almost impossible to get too much color if you use this technique. While I had the pastels at hand, I used the same technique to add some shadows underneath all of the windowsills. Electric meters are just as easy. After priming the meter, I used an India ink wash to age the meter and highlight the details. Then I painted the face of the meter white. When the white paint was dry, I brushed some gloss varnish over just the meter. This will give the illusion of the glass meter cover. Once everything was dry, I glued it to the rear of the building using Aleene's tacky glue. I've known from the start of this project that I wanted a rooftop sign for this building. I used these laser cut letters from Scale Model Scenery to make the sign, but you could print your own letters on 80-pound paper. Select a font you like and use 40-point font for 36-inch tall letters or 30-point font for 27-inch tall letters. Then carefully cut the letters from the paper. I trimmed the small tabs off of the letters. Then I primed the letters front and back. I painted the front of the letters the same off-white I used on the building trim, being careful not to paint the edges of the letters. Leaving the edges unpainted will hopefully de-emphasize the thickness of the letters, which are over 2.5 scale inches thick. I lightly painted the back sides of the letters using various shades of gray, just to break up the monotone appearance. Next, I stained some scale 2x4 and glued floor pieces to the template shown here. I created this template using Inkscape, using the methods I described in Part 5 of this series. Then I glued the individual letters to the 2x4 supports, taking care to keep the letters vertical and aligned horizontally. I fabricated the support structure using scale stripwood and this template, which I also created in Inkscape. The critical step in assembling these supports is cutting the 60-degree angle at the top of the slanted post. This is pretty easy if you're using a chopper. Just use a triangle to hold the piece at the correct angle while you're cutting, as shown here. If you do not have a chopper, you'll have to make the cuts by hand. In that case, start by gluing the slanted post to the template as shown here. Then carefully slice the post along the vertical joint with a single-edged razor blade. Now you can glue the vertical post in place. Once the 4 support assemblies had been glued and allowed to set, I sliced them from the template carefully and sliced off any paper stuck to the back side. Then I placed the two sign assemblies on this third template and carefully glued the supports to the back, keeping them aligned vertically and square with the sign assemblies using a machinist square. Once they had dried, I glued the cross bracing in place as shown here. Notice that one of the vertical posts is about 1/2 inch longer than the others. That will come in handy soon. When all the glue had set, I touched up the cut ends of the strip wood with a thin wash of dark gray acrylic paint. I did not use stain. I was worried that the alcohol-based stain might dissolve the glue joints. I used paint washes in grays, tans, and browns to stain the roof color and make it less uniform. These stains might be caused by water running off the chimney or the plumbing vents, or by puddles that have accumulated and then dried up in places on the roof. I started by brushing plain water across the entire roof. Then I dabbed on washes of various colors in spots around the roof. I drilled a hole in the roof. This is where I will insert that longer post. I applied glue to the other 7 legs of the sign structure and set the entire assembly in position. I mounted the sign at an angle to the building. This adds some visual interest and also causes the sign to face the railroad station more directly. That way, my HO scale travelers can see their destination from across town. Since the roof is a feature of the building that viewers notice first, I try to add some elements of interest to every roof I build. In this case, I decided to add some stacked spare lumber underneath the sign. Presumably this was left over after the sign was built, or perhaps last repaired. I also glued some fine turf to simulate dried leaves that have accumulated around the base of the parapet. I used tan or brown colors to represent dry leaves, and I fixed the turf in place with matte medium. For the final details, I built these chairs from a kit by GC Laser. They will go on the balcony. I also built this bench and placed it on the sidewalk in front of the building. Last, I added these 2 figures, a woman sweeping the sidewalk with a broom and a man carrying 2 pieces of luggage. I always affix figures to my models using Scenic Accents glue by Woodland Scenics. This glue holds nicely, but releases when gently pried apart. This concludes my Sheridan Hotel project. I still need to place it on my layout in its final position and add the surrounding scenery, and I need to add some final details, such as a back porch, a wood pile, trash cans, and so forth. But these all have to wait until I've finalized the layout of my small town representing Creede, Colorado. Thank you for following along on my journey. As I predicted in the first video of this series, I have learned a lot along the way, not just from my mistakes, but also from my successes. I hope you have learned something as well. I have included links to all the products mentioned in this video in the description below. As always, I would love to hear your comments and questions. If you want to see more videos of this type, be sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.